I'm Megan Jones and I'm joined by my colleague Jane Fullerton Smith, and we're both from Green Shoot Pacific. And thanks so much for everybody attending this evening or this morning, depending on where in the world you are. So, of course, the first thing to talk about is why on earth are we concerning ourselves with energy efficiency? And the answer is often cost control. It is a difficult situation in some cases actually to motivate caterers and bar operators at outdoor events to be energy efficient if in fact their energy consumption's not tied back to their costs. Certainly for an event organiser, cost is a major concern and a reasoning behind energy efficiency. But over and above that, of course, we all want to use less fossil fuels and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions for our events. But we will talk a little bit more about incentivising caterers for reductions and how we can tie that back to their costs. So I guess the first thing to think about is energy efficiency and where in fact we can become more energy efficient at our outdoor events. And of course, lighting and stage production's been given a lot of airtime. There's a lot of information out and about for reducing energy consumption on stages, lighting, particularly looking at LED lighting, etc. But other aspects to do with outdoor events certainly are very, very power hungry. And the way that you lay out your site, the type of activities you actually choose to put on your site, how energy intensive they are, the type of equipment that you actually use in kitchen and bars, but across the entire site, the way that equipment's obviously operated, and joined to all of this for many outdoor events is, of course, how efficiently you can configure your mobile power generators. Just because you're going to be reducing demand in your kitchens doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be reducing costs when it comes to outdoor mobile power generators. We're going to have to reduce the size, the running hours, and the number of generators. The goals of energy efficiency in a permanent kitchen, say inside a restaurant, the way to achieve that, whilst it is the same in terms of turning off equipment, etc., the end result really needs to tie back to reducing your generator size. So some interesting data just to kick it off. I don't know whether anybody has done any energy auditing at their events. If you have, please do type it into the chat box. But general figures for outdoor music events, of a typical size and scale and nature, the energy demand is generally split a third onto stage lighting and sound, a third onto bars, catering and refrigeration, and a third of power demand across the site, site lighting, amenities, cabins, temporary structures, etc. So I think that's a really interesting split of information, of data to know about, because generally I think most focus has been given to stage and site, but certainly refrigeration and catering equipment is where a major part of power consumption comes from, what events you work at or are involved with. But just a couple of terms, energy efficiency and energy conservation. These two terms, they're used interchangeably, but they're not really interchangeable. Energy efficiency purely means achieving the same effect, but using less energy to do so. So heating, lighting, volume, these sorts of things, you're still achieving the same effect, but you're using less energy to actually achieve that effect. Energy conservation means going without or preventing the energy from being consumed in the first place. So today we're going to be talking about, and we will hear from you all soon, it's not just my voice hopefully that we'll hear from, we're going to talk about equipment choice, kitchen and bar operations, menu planning, lighting, and we'll also look at some refrigeration, cabin and amenity aspects. Okay, so today we're specifically talking about the area of kitchens. We will also loop in bars and also some site cabin and amenities. We're not looking at the overall energy efficiency of an event to include the stage lighting and sound, nor are we going to really delve down deep into how to achieve optimal efficiency for outdoor power generators, but we certainly are going to be addressing that in the coming months on another workshop. So of course on the screen there I've got what aspects of a kitchen and bar require power. obviously cooking. From a service point of view, you need to really have a look at what sort of wasted energy is occurring around the service aspect of your catering operations. Dishwashing may or may not be appropriate at some outdoor events, obviously depending whether you're using reusables or not. But refrigeration is a major consumer of energy, especially those outdoor events with a lot of drinking, which in Australia, and I'm sure everybody knows, we certainly do. Some temporary catering outlets may need extraction or exhaust fans, depending on the setup of the kitchen and what type of cooking is happening in there. Certainly, coffee machines are a major power pull, as is anything that heats water that has an element running out of electricity, such as a hot water urn. Bar systems, of course, also are power-hungry setups. So in kitchens, we have a whole raft of cooking equipment. Yesterday, when we did this webinar, we heard from quite a few caterers, and one of the things that came through was, in no way do they want event organisers, so event managers, site managers, coming into their kitchens and saying, should you have that stove on? Should you be using that grill? So clearly, most of us on the call today are event organisers, and we need to be mindful that the energy efficiency communications around the type of equipment choice and certainly how they're using equipment needs to be done well before the event. There certainly is no opportunity to be going into kitchens at events and telling people telling the operators to operate in a different way. You certainly need to be pre-communicating your energy efficiency concepts. So I'm wondering on the call today whether anybody has been in a situation where they have meticulously required detailed energy consumption data of every piece of equipment, such as the ones on the screen, by the potential food stall holders or caterers, because it really is the key. I'm wondering, Cameron, you might have some experience with that, I know that you've operated at a lot of events and have done audits. Have you ever seen any events that have required the caterers to list down the type of equipment that they're using?
Hi, Megan. Hi, everybody. I really haven't, to be honest, Megan. It's something that we talk about, of course, but I generally find that once you're on site, they're not too welcome in those parts of the kitchen.
Yeah. What about before the event?
I'm doing some reviews of some venues at the moment, and so I've got a lot more access to the kitchens there because they just they're operating all the time.
Okay.
But not so much temporary facilities.
Yeah, okay. And I'll just mute you now. So we're, as part of this research and work that we're doing in this area, we've been asked to produce some resources, and certainly those resources will be available in the coming months. But one of the things that I have discovered is that those events that are highly tuned into energy efficiency, the very first thing that they do is to estimate demand. Now, to estimate your power demand, you're going to have to ask the power users what they anticipate they're going to use. By doing this, you're going to get them to self-reflect on the type of equipment that they're going to be using, and they are going to have to do the calculations themselves to work out what kind of power pull the various pieces of equipment are going to have. And so this information is the information that site managers and certainly electricians and mobile power generators and suppliers are really, really hanging to get. The complaints always come back from the site managers and from the electricians and generator providers that they just don't have enough data to go for. And so what they do is overcompensate power supply. And that is the key to an inefficient event when it comes to energy. So the very first thing to look at for energy efficiency is to understand the equipment that's going to be used by all of the power users. And in this case, of course, we're talking about kitchens and bars. So we want the caterers to list down every single piece of equipment that they're going to be using and to let you know what the wattage and ampage is that these pieces of equipment require. So set up a spreadsheet or a table or even an online form and get them to go through that process. By going through that process, they get to, I guess, discover the energy intensity of their kitchen setup. And that is the first step towards an energy efficient event, is some kind of realization, understanding and acknowledgement of the amount of energy that the power users may in fact use. So obviously, if we've gone through that step, the next step is to look at where the power hungry pieces of equipment are. And I'm sure you all have heard deliberations between electric based kitchen equipment and gas based kitchen equipment. The figures on the screen are actually Australian figures. Everyone from each country on the call today will need to go back and have a look at the figures as they apply to their particular country, and I'll explain what I mean by this now. So first off, we've got a figure of 0.87, 0.75, 0.18 and 0.21. What these are the kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions, which are expressed as CO2e, which is a technical term, which is carbon dioxide equivalent. So the amount of greenhouse gases for every kilowatt hour of power produced. So you can see by those figures there that electricity, 0.87, and gas, 0.18 or 0.21, there's quite a bit of a gap between the energy intensity in terms of greenhouse gas emissions is far higher in Australia for electricity versus gas. Now, this is because in Australia we primarily burn coal to create our mains power. So you would need to look at your own country's emissions factor for mains power electricity per kilowatt hour. And that will enlighten you as to whether gas or mains electricity is the most efficient in terms of greenhouse gas production and use of fossil fuels. So I would definitely look at that first up. Now, I've put diesel in there as well. Diesel is the fuel used, of course, in mobile power generators. Most mobile power generators, an average for mobile power generators is 3.5 kilowatt hours per litre of diesel used. So it is a bit of a tricky figure, and different generators have got different, power outputs. But an average is 3.5 kilowatt hours per litre of fuel. This then breaks down to 0.75 kilograms of diesel per kilowatt hour. So you can see that it is quite a lot higher again than gas. But the next thing to look at is the relative efficiency of how electric elements transfer heat to your cooking apparatus as compared to gas. And electricity is actually far more efficient. So when you're hearing people say electricity is more efficient than gas, they are actually correct when it comes down to how efficient the heat can transfer into the pots, for example, versus gas. However, when you bring it back to greenhouse gas emissions, it is much less efficient to use electricity. So you need to have a look at where your motivation lies. Are you trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? In that case, in Australia, you would choose gas. If you're trying to reduce costs and costs only, then you need to have a look at the relative expense of the gas versus the diesel in generators versus electricity. So you can see that it's a very, very convoluted and quite technical set of calculations that you have to do at the end of the day. So I think that data is really interesting, because otherwise we're just talking about theory and gut feel, and having that sort of data can help you make an informed decision. So Cameron's on the call, on the chat box, saying salamander grills, so the one that does my head in, plus the sandwich press. Often the chef or cook turns them on at the start of the day and just leaves them on regardless of whether there's a toasty in there or not. And that is exactly right. And the next topic after menu planning is actually going to be about kitchen operations. So we will talk about those things in a moment. So menu planning, what we're talking about here is what is the energy intensity of your meal choices. And I guess Cameron has hinted a little bit at that. Is the type of meal, or are the type of meals and ingredients and preparation methods needed quite energy intensive? Some of the hints you can look at to predict whether a meal is going to be energy intensive is the complexity of the preparation, the components. Are there many elements that need to be cooked separately? So looking at how complex a menu is, or how complex a meal is, and the type of equipment that needs to be used certainly will give you a heads up on how energy intensive a meal item is. One of the indicators that I suggest that you look to measuring when you're measuring the energy efficiency of your event is actually the kilowatt hours of power per meal. Now, this will be possible to find out if you can get reports on number of meals sold, and you can get reports on total kilowatt hours of power consumed. You can get a figure for your event of the energy intensity of your meal planning. Now, there's probably nothing much you can do about that post-event, but certainly what you can do is start to build some figures, some benchmarks, and understanding, and you may start to see a pattern of what the least energy intensive meal options are. So kitchen and bar operations, and this is something that the way that the staff in the kitchen operate the equipment is going to be a major key area to achieving energy efficiency. So typically, you do see equipment being put on and left on in a permanent kitchen scenario. Now, this is a real problem, obviously, for temporary kitchens, because for every piece of equipment on in these catering tents, this is most probably going to be directly drawing power from a mobile power generator. If kitchen operations are being particularly energy wasteful and that you don't have any kind of training, induction, or expectations with kitchen staff on how to operate their kitchens efficiently, then the site managers, electricians, and generator providers are going to have to supersize their generators to make sure they cover the scenario where somebody in a kitchen may just turn everything on and leave it all on. So you're really going to have to combine education, engagement, and understanding by the kitchen operators and staff, and also the inductions and auditing, going around and checking what they're doing. Now, I said previously that the caterers don't want a nosy event manager going into their stalls and saying turn this off or turn that off, but one thing you can do is at least observe for next time so you know what you need to message and engage them on more diligently. And also you can be checking up that they've actually bought the equipment that they said they were going to. The last thing we want is caterers to A, not have a clue what they're going to bring, B, not tell you so that you have to completely guess the equipment power pool and therefore generator size. And of course, D, we never want over demand on generators causing a generator cutout, especially if the generator is also powering the stage. Now, larger events that need multiple generators obviously will split their generators between the stage performance elements and the kitchen elements, so that absolutely doesn't happen, but it is something to be wary of on smaller events. So on the screen now are some tips that you could share with your caterers pre-event. The key, I think, is actually finding caterers that are already tuned into energy efficiency. And apart from actually, getting them to focus on the type of equipment they're going to be using and listing that out for you, you can incentivize them by charging them for their power. Now, I'm sure heads are nodding at the moment and we're going, yes, of course we charge them for their power. But what most event organisers do is charge caterers and power users for their access to their power, not for the actual amount of kilowatt hours consumed. And I think this is a really important difference. If you've got potential huge consumer of electricity, then you should look to metering that power user so that you can charge them for their power, and then they will be incentivized to be running their operations efficiently. So I think that this is something that you really should be thinking about. I'm interested to know whether any event organisers on the call have charged their caterers for power before.
I think this is a really topical webinar for us to be engaging in workshop. The reason is because we've been talking about this stuff for quite some time, and yet I've found, as somebody who's been auditing events and helping them to improve their sustainability performance, that this energy efficiency in the cooking out events, it's the next area that hasn't really been explored yet. So it's quite new. So I'm certainly aware of the topics, but having examples to talk about is tricky. It's very topical because I find that even though I'm auditing quite a few events and providing advice, that this looking at energy efficiency in kitchens is things that we've been talking about in training delivery and in sustainable event management system stuff for a while, and yet it's not an area that I have actually had a chance to really sink my teeth into much, because the events that I've been helping haven't been ready to do that yet. It's been just, a bridge a little bit too far, but I think now is coming into the right time.
Yeah, well, I did notice that in doing our research for these production of these guides and stuff, and the reason that this workshop is actually on is that people's sights or gazes have not been lifted to focus on power consumption control by caterers and bars. It simply hasn't been even looked at. The vast number of events that I've spoken to have either they don't ask their traders, their caterers, what power they need, or they just provide them as much power as they need. They certainly don't do things such as ban element or electric-based bain-maries and deep fryers. So the bain-maries are if you ordered a curry that was heat and serve and it was there with the glass front and the boiling water underneath keeps the curry warm. So these pieces of equipment, as well as deep fryers, both come in gas varieties. And certainly I have come across a couple of events that are banning electric element-based cooking equipment. So deep fryers and bain-maries, and also hot water urns in some cases, not allowing them on site. Now, obviously, the event organisers on the call, you can't put that in place unless you know that gas equipment is possible. The other trick to it too is that for those organisers that are providing power for free, why on earth would a caterer choose gas equipment when they're going to have to pay for their gas? So that's a balancing act that you need to look at as well, is if you want to reduce the electricity demand, we all know that less greenhouse gas emissions are created through using gas versus electric. So if we're wanting to have a GHG reduction, we need to push people towards gas. In order to get them to go towards gas, we're going to have to monetize it. Is that the right word? We're going to have to incentivize them to look at cost savings relative. So if their electricity is charged out at a higher rate than it's going to cost them for gas, then perhaps they'll be incentivized to move across to gas. But yeah, I agree that not a lot of events or organisers have focused in on this, and I think that it's a field that we're going to see increased in the next year or two. We're ahead of the curve here, everybody, on this call. So you can see that, there's a few tips on the screen, and as I say, you're not going to, as an event organiser, march into the kitchen and say, I've read that, if your oven's not being used for 20 minutes, you should turn it off. This is not the approach to take, but certainly getting energy efficient kitchen operations, staff engagement, equipment choice, information to your caterers well in advance and engaging them around energy efficiency is the key. Getting them to tell you the equipment they're using, you going back and highlighting where the energy intensive equipment is, communicating with them ways to become more efficient in their kitchens, and including the cost element to the equation to push people to be more energy efficient using electric equipment or convert over to gas, assuming the dollars make sense for them.
I've just unmuted myself to chime in and say that one of the things that occurs to me that you could do would be to tell the caterers that they're not going to have three-phase power to the kitchens, that they'll only have single phase, and that anything that they require that is going to require, they're going to be running, that's going to require more current than that, then they'd need to source gas equipment for those things.
Yeah, that's a good
That
idea.
would,
So put
That
people on a
that's a
power
pretty
diet.
simple thing. Yeah, and all you'd have to do is, well, the first thing you could do is just say we're not going to give you three-phase power for it,
Yeah.
and then straight away they're either going to 10 amp or 15 amp equipment
Yeah.
in single phase and not running three-phase. It would make a huge difference.
Yeah. So the type of equipment choice instantly ramps up if you tell the traders that they have got access to three-phase power. Thank you for that. Okay, so refrigeration. I wanted to have a chat through about refrigeration, and I'm sure people may have been at events where they see the trailer-based cool rooms or cold rooms that's on the screen. There's also things that we call in Australia reefers, which are refrigerated shipping containers. And they're used on site quite a lot. There's also double fridges or single fridges, glass front fridges or steel front fridges, under counter fridges. These big walk-in cool rooms that we see here on the trailer can be plugged into to power provision, or in fact, some of them come with their own small generators on the front. So there's a lot of different options for refrigeration. And one, of course, is putting cans or bottles of drinks straight into tubs of ice. And we heard yesterday from a bar operator at one of the major music events in Australia, and they're saying that they ensure before they put their drinks into ice that they are pre-chilled, because putting room temperature drinks into tubs of ice just immediately makes all the ice melt. The other thing too is having a bar operator that knows how long beverages are going to need pre-chilling. You may not need to put these cool rooms on 4 days in advance. So there is some science around that, and an experienced operator will be able to give a really authentic estimate of how far in advance the beverages need to be cooled down. The other option, of course, is to order in pre-chilled beverages, depending on the type of event you've got, the number of days, its location, etc. That's a way to kind of divert the energy from cooling off you and to your wholesaler. But certainly I think the big ticket item with regards to energy efficiency and refrigeration is for events that need refrigeration to occur overnight, do one of two things. If you have mains power, make sure you put your refrigeration onto your mains power, not onto mobile power generators. If you only have mobile power generators and you've got an event of a certain scale that you need more than one power generator, then split it out into numerous generators and isolate or dedicate a mobile power generator just for refrigeration and anything else that needs power all night long. The last thing you want to do is have a one-size-fits-all generator and have, it providing power to all of your deep fryers and all of the other cooking equipment and lights, etc., that you need, and then leaving it running all night long just to run one small cool room. So you're completely oversizing your generator capacity there. It's like you've hired or you're running a V8 car, a massive 4 or 5 litre car when you only needed a 1.3 litre car. So you're just oversizing it. The fuel consumption is greater. The efficiency is incredibly low because the power pool or power demand of that particular generator is low. So I think with regards to refrigeration, it's right size your refrigerator for the job. You all know that, at home, the most energy efficient fridge in your kitchen is a full one. Know the technicalities of how long it takes for beverages to cool down. Minimize your door opening and closing. And of course, as I just mentioned, isolate refrigeration power either across to mains or to its own smaller generator, which will run all night, giving you the option to completely switch off the other generators, which are only needed during the show time. So every event is different. The configuration is different, of course, but I think they're the main tips for refrigeration. Okay, lighting. An awful photo on the screen at the moment, and that is a photo in the day of the lights blaring. So this is something that you don't want to see at your events, especially with your caterers during the day. Now, what the trick here is to actually enable the power provision to these lights to be able to be switched on and off inside the tents. What's happened here, I think, is that cabling has been run all the way along the front of these food stalls and probably plugged straight into a distribution board right next to the generator. And the individual food traders that we could see in the photo have got no control over those lights. There's even lights shining off into the distance, not even down onto their menus. So that's an interesting one as well. But be mindful of lighting with food outlets. There's no reason why you need to have 250 watt floodlights. Have a look at LED lighting, and certainly fluorescent tubes can work in these tents as well. So our last topic for today, porta cabins, temporary infrastructure, amenities, toilet blocks, etc. I'm wondering whether anybody has any idea how much power these sorts of temporary infrastructure have. If you were to do a power profile or a power audit for your event, I previously said that it's around about 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 split between catering, site cabins such as these, and stages. But unless you do an energy audit, you're really not going to know. And unless you have that data, you're not going to be able to make an informed decision to take action to reduce the energy consumption and enhance your efficiency, obviously. But some of the tricks of the trade with regards to temporary structures is firstly, in hot climates, site them with shade, and in cool climates, site them with access to the sun, so that you're going to take advantage of the passive heating and cooling elements that the earth provides. And Cameron's mentioned in the chat box there, of course, we need to be looking at insulation, ventilation, and making sure seals and the way that these cabins work is efficient. I know that there's some cabins that you can get that are solar powered, and I think that's something you should look for in your neck of the woods. And also have a look at, for those events that have got a lot of site cabins with crew working in them, etc., a little power sucker can be having a kettle in every single cabin rather than a centralized tea and coffee area, because kettles, funnily enough, are a major power consumer. Air conditioning, obviously, in temporary structures is a bit of a challenge as well. I've worked at events where we've had a lot of tents like the one you can see on the left of the screen, the usual clear span marquees, that have had to be air conditioned or heated to 23 degrees as per technical rider provided by a major touring artist. So that would pose quite a challenge because, in many locations, of course, you can't predict the weather. So we had to have both heating and cooling on standby. And so there's nothing much you can do about that, obviously, if you've got an artist that requires this, except potentially talking to them. But certainly you can have a look at place that you site cabins, and also, the thermal effects of the coverings that the various temporary structures have. Air conditioning in site cabins, as Cameron said, can be a huge waste of electricity. And I don't know how many site cabins I've seen with the air conditioning really going for it, but the doors and windows wide open. So obviously go for fans if you can compared to air conditioning. But those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, I'm imagining that heating may be a challenge, something that you're definitely looking at in terms of climate control. So hopefully lots of warm and excitable bodies inside your site cabins working at fever pitch can organically warm up your site cabins as well. Okay, so I've come to the end of our webinar for this evening, but I wouldn't mind going around the room and hearing from everyone if you've learned anything from this, or if you have anything to add, or in fact, if you have any questions to ask. So I'm going to just unmute you all, and we can potentially hear from some people. So Maddie in Brisbane, did anything resonate with you tonight?
Yeah, I found it all really interesting. I haven't had any practical experience, so I haven't seen any of it myself. But you mentioned it's a good chance to find catering companies that are already in tune with sustainability. So have you found that any catering companies actually already have their own initiatives in place and kind of use it as a selling point or as a competitive advantage?
Yeah, very few though, very few. There are some certainly like gold class caterers, so the types that would be brought in to do VIP catering, there absolutely are some. But your stock standard food stall holder at an outdoor music festival, very few.
Wow.
As a general rule, it isn't something that caterers have been focusing on. They have been focusing on food sourcing, obviously, and waste reduction initiatives, especially in regards to the use of packaging and that sort of thing. So I think sites are just starting to turn to think about the energy intensity of their food offerings. I think we're probably coming to the end of our webinar. So thank you so much to everybody for attending this evening, and I hope that it was informative and that you all go off and diligently inquire to your catering and food traders what equipment they're going to be using and work with them to engage in having more energy efficient equipment choice and more energy efficient in-kitchen behaviour. So thank you very much. I will send you some links and contacts and further information out via email. Thank you very much and good night.